Now, if you are wondering why the episode number has gone backward, it's because this is the episode I was in the process of making before I changed my mind and uploaded the one on the parasitic mind. Sorry, it's just the way I organize my files and folders. Not forgetting I'm a little tup also. But in this episode, we're taking a look at a teaching that, I'll admit right from the start, I found hard to digest, at least initially. The teaching was much more difficult to accept than the other ideas I had previously looked at, because whereas those previous concepts made sense and were part of my own current experience, this one, well, not so much. And that's mainly due to my background. And I think there will be others who will feel the same way, at least initially. Now, we've just visited the teachings of Eckhart Tolle, who talks about the power of presence, stillness, and how stepping out of the ego can free us from suffering. Now, his teaching is simple and, in a way, somehow immediately familiar. It's like he's pointing out something we already know intuitively, deep down. At least those of us who have done some thinking in this area. Now, Tolle often tips his hat to a set of writings called A Course in Miracles. He's mentioned it in his lectures more than once, claiming its spirit lines up with what he teaches. But there's a difference, a big difference. And I felt it as soon as I started to read this text myself. Whereas Tolle keeps things stripped down, very universal and simple, A Course in Miracles comes wrapped in very religious or Christian language. God, Christ, the Holy Spirit, sin and salvation, all that stuff. And it can sound like you've walked straight into Sunday school, at least on the surface. And if you've had your fill of organized religion, that can be a stumbling block. And I've seen how this has been the experience for many. And I'll be honest with you, it was for me also. So, regretting I had bought A Course in Miracles, I set it aside until I found out differently. I discovered that teachers of the Course insist these words don't mean what we think they mean, from the Christian context, that is. The Holy Spirit here isn't the third person of the Godhead. It's more the voice of inner guidance, the nudge of wisdom inside us, if you like. The Christ isn't just the historical Jesus. It's the spark of divine awareness within all of us. And atonement isn't about punishment. It's about undoing the error of separation. It's about coming back to oneness. And if you break that word down, if you break down atonement, you get at one-ment. Tolle himself warns us not to get hung up on the words, which I initially did. My bad. What he says is, if the religious vocabulary puts you off, just translate it into your own language. Call it awareness. Call it higher consciousness. Call it whatever helps you connect. Because whatever you call it, the message is the same. That the ego we carry around creates a world of fear, conflict, and separation. And the miracle, as the Course explains, is a shift in perception. From fear to love, from separation to oneness. And seen from that perspective, it becomes much more digestible. This shift in translation is what helped me continue to read A Course in Miracles. So in this episode, we're going to open the door to this course and take a look at what it has to say about consciousness, forgiveness, and the path back to remembering who we really are. But don't worry, I won't be preaching from a pulpit, and I certainly won't be passing around a collection plate. And as we'll see, this isn't a detour from what we've been exploring. It's another path pointing to the same destination. The realization that we are not separate, but part of the one. Whether we call it presence, the Christ within, or simply awareness. It's all about waking up from the dream of division and returning to the source we never truly left. That's why I'm including it in this series. Now, before we dive into what the Course actually teaches, I think it's worth pausing and asking, Where on earth did this thing come from? Because, well, the backstory is unusual, to say the least. I'm the Grumpy Grandpa. The year was 1965, and surprisingly, the setting wasn't some monastery or desert cave, as you might think. No, it was Columbia University's College of Physicians and Surgeons in New York City, no less. Two psychologists, Helen Schuckman and William Thetford, were colleagues working in a high-pressure academic environment. Neither of them were particularly religious. In fact, Helen described herself as an atheist who was more comfortable with science than spirituality. Then something strange began to happen. Helen started having a series of unusual inner experiences, vivid dreams, symbolic images, and finally what she described as hearing an inner voice. And this voice identified itself quite calmly as Jesus. Now, for someone who didn't even believe in God, you can imagine how unsettling that must have been. But what's interesting is she started writing down the dictation, in shorthand at first, then later with Thetford's help, who typed it all out. What came through over the next 7 years was thousands of pages which were not random ramblings, but a highly structured teaching. And that teaching became what we know as A Course in Miracles, or ACIM as it's otherwise known. The course has 3 parts: the text, laying out its principles, the workbook for students, which are 365 daily lessons meant to retrain the mind, and the manual for teachers, a kind of a Q&A for those who want to take things further. And there is a paradox here that fascinates me. Helen herself never became a cheerleader for this work. She often admitted she resisted it, even disliked parts of it. Imagine that, a skeptical scientist, channeling one of the most influential spiritual texts of the last century, but not fully embracing it herself. After its completion, the manuscripts quietly circulated among colleagues and small groups until the mid-1970s, when the Foundation for Inner Peace was formed and the book was finally published in 1976. From there, it spread almost entirely by word of mouth, and it's now in more than 24 languages, studied all around the world. So what have we got here? Well, we've got a reluctant scribe, an academic setting, and a text that speaks in the voice of Jesus, yet delivers a philosophy that feels closer to mystical non-duality or oneness than traditional Christianity. However you slice it, that's a remarkable story of how a teaching like this makes its way into the world. Back to Eckhart Tolle. Now, Tolle explicitly praises ACIM as extraordinary, believing it's one of the rare channeled works that truly penetrates and points toward non-dual awareness, or oneness, which he obviously ascribes to. He's even used it for teaching small groups. Still, he cautions that its old-fashioned Christian terminology can put people off, unless they can see past the words to what they truly point to. One of Tolle's central metaphors is that the Course's aim is to wipe your mind clean, like squeezing a sponge and letting go of all meaning, judgment, and opinion. In that blank open space of presence, the holy instant arises, which is the Course's way of describing a timeless moment when we drop all judgment, all grievances, and all thoughts of past and future. In that instant, the ego's story dissolves, and only love remains. And it's not something we achieve by effort. It's simply the willingness to let go of everything that blocks love. The Course says the holy instant is always available, because reality is only ever now. So in practical terms, every time we truly forgive, every time we choose love over fear, we are entering the holy instant. It's a taste of eternity within the flow of time, a glimpse of the oneness, the Course says, is our true home. And Tolle admits that if presence is already a stable experience in your life, you may not need A Course in Miracles. But if your awareness comes and goes, especially in times of disturbance and challenge, which can occur to me oftentimes, then engaging with the Course's daily workbook can help stabilize that shift. Now, according to Tolle, A Course in Miracles intentionally uses dualistic language in order to connect with the mind that's stuck in the idea of separation. From there, it gently leads the mind towards an experiential understanding of non-duality, like a carrot leading a donkey, sort of. Tolle quotes A Course in Miracles directly in his book, The Power of Now.
A Course in Miracles rightly points out that whenever you are unhappy, there is the unconscious belief that the unhappiness buys you what you want. Its only useful function is that it strengthens the ego, and that is why the ego loves it.
Now, this captured the shared insight between Tolle and the Course, which is that suffering is not liberation, but ego reinforcement. Now, before we move on, there's another figure we need to bring into this story, because without him, A Course in Miracles might never have made the impact it did. And his name is Kenneth Wapnick. Ken was a psychologist like Helen and Bill, but also a trained spiritual seeker with a background in Catholicism and a strong interest in mysticism. In 1972, he was introduced to Helen and Thetford and quickly became a close friend and collaborator. In fact, Helen trusted him more than almost anyone else with the material. It was Kenneth who helped organize, edit, and clarify the thousands of pages that Helen had transcribed. He didn't change the message, but he worked closely with Helen to prepare it for publication, smoothing rough edges and giving it the shape we know today. In a sense, if Helen was the reluctant scribe, then Ken was the patient midwife who helped bring the Course into the world. But his role didn't end with the editing. After the Course was published in 1976 by the Foundation for Inner Peace, Kenneth became its most devoted teacher and interpreter. He spent decades writing books, giving lectures, and guiding students through the often dense language of the Course. For many, Wapnick's work became the bridge that made ACIM accessible, practical, and consistent. And here's something else worth noting. Kenneth always emphasized that the Course wasn't about building a new religion or worshipping its text. He reminded students over and over again that it was simply a tool for training the mind to move from fear to love, from ego to truth. The book, he said, was just a means. The real goal was an inner shift, and that resonates with me. So the collaboration is very interesting. Helen gave us the words, Bill Tetford provided the steady encouragement to keep going, and it was Kenneth who ensured that A Course in Miracles lived on, not gathering dust unread on our shelves, but as a living teaching still studied around the world today. And it was listening to him on YouTube which caused me to pick up ACIM and to start reading it again. This time from a different perspective. All right. So now that we know how the Course came into being, let's step into the heart of what it actually teaches. And let me tell you, this is where things can get both simple and annoyingly tricky at the same time. Now, at its core, A Course in Miracles says that the world we see isn't reality at all. And this echoes what we have looked at thus far on this channel. But the Course claims it's a projection of the ego, a kind of dream separation from God or from the source. The ego tells us we're on our own, fragile and a constant threat. And so we end up living in fear, judgment, and conflict. In contrast to that, the Course says this separation never really happened. It's an illusion. We are still one with the source, one with each other. But we've fallen asleep to that truth. The purpose of the Course is to help us wake up. Now, how does it suggest we do that? Well, there are two key tools, forgiveness and miracles. What? Seriously? Thank you. Where was I? Oh, yes. The tools. Now, forgiveness in the Course doesn't mean excusing someone's bad behavior. It means realizing that beneath all the illusions of conflict and wrongdoing, no real harm has been done because we were never truly separate in the first place. In forgiving, we release others, but more importantly, we release ourselves from the chains of resentment and fear. Then we have miracles, which aren't supernatural tricks. They're shifts in perception. A miracle happens any time the mind turns away from fear and chooses love instead. It's a revisioning of reality where we begin to see through the ego's dream. You change your perspective. And then there's the Holy Spirit. Again, not some floating figure in the sky, but the Course's name for the inner voice of guidance and truth. Think of it as the bridge between the world of illusion and the awareness of oneness. If we listen, it gently nudges us back towards love, step by step. So to boil it all down, the world of separation is an illusion. The ego is the voice of fear. The Holy Spirit is the voice of truth. Forgiveness is the practice that dissolves the illusion. And miracles are the natural result of that practice. The final goal? To remember who we really are, not separate and certainly not broken, but one with the source. What the Course calls the Christ within, or in the language we've been using in this series, awakening back to the one. So to flesh it out a little more, the Course begins by pointing to something we all know too well. There's a restless voice in our heads, constantly afraid, constantly comparing, constantly separating. That voice is what the Course calls the ego. It arose from the thought that we could be separate from Source. And once that thought took root, the ego spun an entire false world to make that separation feel real. And that brings us to one of the most striking teachings of A Course in Miracles. The world itself is an illusion. According to the Course, what our physical eyes show us is not reality. It's a projection of the ego's thought system. The conflicts and struggles we see aren't ultimate truth, but symbols of the separation we falsely believe in. Yet the Course isn't asking us to deny the world. Instead, it says the world can be reinterpreted. It can become a classroom, a place where every experience is used to unlearn the ego and remember love. So how do we begin to undo the ego's illusions? Well, the Course gives us a single central tool: forgiveness. But as I already mentioned, not forgiveness as we usually think of it. In the Course's radical view, true forgiveness doesn't say, "You hurt me, but I'll let it go." Instead, it says, "What I thought you did has no real power over the truth of who we are." Forgiveness becomes then a way of seeing past the illusion to the innocence that lies beneath. And each time we practice it, we untangle a little more of the ego's grip. This is why the Course calls shifts in perception miracles. A miracle is nothing more than moving from fear to love, not about supernatural events. It's about changing the mind. And the Course insists that miracles are not rare at all. They are meant to be a daily occurrence, our natural state, if you like, once we remember to listen to the right voice. Because alongside the ego, there is another voice, what the Course calls the Holy Spirit. Where the ego speaks for fear, the Holy Spirit speaks for truth. It's that quiet guidance within us, always pointing us back towards love. In fact, the Course says the Holy Spirit is the bridge between our dream of separation and the reality of oneness. Every situation, even painful ones, can be reinterpreted through this voice of love. And as we learn to follow that guidance, the final realization begins to dawn. We are not separate individuals. We are not fragile bodies, not the ego we've been defending all our lives. Our true identity is what the Course calls the Christ. Not Jesus alone, but the shared spark of divinity that lives in all of us. Remember, this is the purpose of the Course, to awaken from the dream of separation and recognize that we never truly left Source. We are still as God created us, whole, innocent, and eternal. So what we've seen here is not so different from the voices we already explored, whether in Eckhart Tolle, the Law of One, or in the perennial wisdom of countless traditions. At its heart, the Course tells us that the ego's story of separation is not the truth, that forgiveness is the path to undo that illusion, and that what remains is the simple recognition of who we really are. It reminds us that every moment is an opportunity to choose fear or love, illusion or truth, ego or spirit. And this choice is not just personal, it's universal, because beneath the surface of all appearances, there is only one self. The Christ that A Course in Miracles speak of is the same oneness that sages across time have pointed to, the same eternal presence that is aware of itself right now, in this very moment. So when we practice the Course's forgiveness, when we allow miracles to shift our perception, we are really remembering what has always been true, that consciousness is not fragmented, but whole, that the one was never broken apart, and that in truth, we are still as Source created us, untouched, radiant, and free. So that being said, what then is the prison planet? Until the next time.
If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to the Grumpy Old Buggers channel, so I can get some peace and quiet.